Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on CReDo, optimizing data sharing to develop infrastructure resilience. My name is Alana Gluck, and I am the engagement lead for the Climate Resilience Demonstrator, and I am with Connected Places Catapult. And today we have a really interesting agenda for you. We have, of course, a welcome and a bit of housekeeping so that you can get the most out of this webinar. And then we'll provide an overview of what is the Climate Resilience Demonstrator. And then I'll be joined by our key CReDo partners to talk a bit more about what are some of the challenges in the different infrastructure sectors where CReDo is developing and what that collaboration has looked like to date. We'll then do an open Q&A session and we'll close with some final thoughts. Today's webinar should run about 45 minutes. And before we kick off, I would like to mention that unfortunately, my colleague Elliot Christou, who was going to join us today, has not been able to join us. So we will be running slightly shorter than anticipated, but we look forward to a really interesting conversation with our partners. Next slide, please. So just to note, as I said, today's session will run approximately 45 minutes rather than 1 hour, and we're using the Zoom Q&A feature. So please send through your questions to the host and panel, and we'll aim to answer as many questions as possible during this session. If you have any further questions or would like to know more about engaging with us, do feel free to contact us directly at the email address on your screen. Next slide, please. So just a quick word about Connected Places Catapult. So we are the UK's innovation accelerator for cities, transport, and place leadership. We're a part of a network of 9 centres, which were established by the UK government in areas of the economy where there's high potential for innovation and benefits to society. You'll see on your screen a number of different circles, which is the areas in which the catapult is currently working. And right at the center of your screen, you'll see a circle that says integrated infrastructure. And really, that is the impetus for the development of CReDo. We're interested in understanding how infrastructure can be integrated to better benefit places, people, and society. Next slide, please. So as I said, that understanding of connected infrastructure systems is really at the motivation behind CReDo. So what has become more evident as climate change progresses is that it would be imperative for us to understand the interdependencies between our infrastructure systems so that when an event happens that impacts on an asset or an infrastructure system, we're not only looking at it as an isolated event, but rather we're beginning to understand where there are connections within sectors and between sectors, understand where those interdependencies interact, and how we can build resilience across the entire system in order to achieve better outcomes. And this has been highlighted in a number of key government documents produced by the Climate Change Committee, as well as the National Infrastructure Progress Review. Next slide, please. So in order to understand what those interdependencies are and to actually begin to build that resilience within the systems, really we need to have a better understanding of what data is available within sectors, where there's value in sharing data across sectors, and how we can build and develop insights from that data to benefit the holistic understanding of the system. And with the CReDo project, we've been very lucky to have the support of Baroness Brown of the Climate Change Committee, who's highlighted time and time again the need to have a better understanding of how to share infrastructure to create benefits across the system. Next slide, please. So CReDo isn't a new concept. In fact, we've been on quite a long journey. Established at first in December of 2017 with the publication of the report Data from the Public Good from the National Infrastructure Commission, which put forth an argument for a demonstrator to demonstrate the value of cross-sector data sharing and demonstrate the potential for digital twins on national scale. From that time, the ideation of CReDo came about at the Center for Digital Built Britain, which was a partnership established by the University of Cambridge, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and industry at large to build and conceptualize a digital built Britain that harnesses the power of data to create benefits for people and society. During the ideation phase, the CReDo concept was developed as part of the original National Digital Twin Program. At the time that Center for Digital Built Britain completed its mission and passed on its insights to the industry, Connected Places Catapult picked up CReDo as a exemplar project to demonstrate the value of developing connected digital twins for insights and decision making. Um, at the Catapult, we've been developing CReDo as a demonstrator, working with our partners across the infrastructure sectors to develop use cases specifically for the benefit of those sectors, but most importantly, to demonstrate the value of developing a connected understanding of infrastructure and where those sectors can work together to achieve overall climate resilience for our critical national infrastructure. We've been partnering with UK Power Networks with my colleague James, who you'll hear from today, on our off-gen strategic innovation funded CReDo Plus projects. We've moved from discovery and alpha concept phase, and we're in the process of mobilizing for a beta phase in which we plan to scale up CReDo across the energy sector. You'll also hear today from our colleague Richard Buckingham from Anglian Water, our partner on the Ofwat funded Breakthrough Challenge, where we've developed a proof of concept online tool, to help water companies begin to understand the risks posed to their assets and their systems from extreme heat. And we're also in the process of developing a forward plan to scale up in the water sector. We're also working with our colleagues at BT Group, and you'll hear from my colleague Justine later on, to understand the importance of telecommunications and enabling this cross-sector data sharing, and to develop use cases to benefit the telecom sector as a whole. Next slide, please. So that was a lot of information, but what is CReDo? Next slide. So CReDo is a climate change adaptation digital twin, which brings together data from across energy, water, and telecoms networks with weather data to understand how we can increase system resilience and adapt across the system. This will help us to understand infrastructure interdependencies, understand where assets might fail and where there will be system impacts, and most importantly, how can we better prepare and respond to these challenges and make better investment decisions about infrastructure? Next slide, please. So in a traditional understanding of asset failure, you'll see on the screen a blue blob, which represents a flooding event. In traditional asset modeling, when a flood occurs, you would have an understanding of the impact specifically to the assets involved. In this case, on the screen, you'll see that it's electricity assets that would be impacted on the flooding. Where CReDo comes in is how that incident actually impacts across the entire connected system. So if you click one more time, you'll see how the risk actually cascades across the system, um, increasing the likelihood of failure in multiple assets across multiple organizations, ultimately impacting the communities involved. Next slide, please. So by sharing data across organizational boundaries, and you'll see the list of data sources on the left of your screen, the economic modeling and data sharing that's supported in CReDo would give it a very clear picture of where there were critical assets and where we could make better investment decisions, not only within our organizations, but potentially in collaboration across a system of organizations to build resilience in order to avoid that cascading failure across the entire system. Next slide, please. So to date, Um, the CReDo user and use cases have focused on asset operators, managers, and planners who are directly impacted by asset failure and who have a duty to develop that resilience within their organization, but also across the network. We're also looking forward to developing use cases for regulators and government so that better decisions can be made on the development of markets, as well as creating national interventions in the case of, for example, extreme weather scenarios. Part of that use case is understanding the cost benefit analysis to make better investments in resilience planning, as well as developing resilience metrics and reporting to support government decision makers. Next slide, please. So there are four main technical elements of CReDo. The first is the cascading asset risk modeling, which gives us a clear understanding of the behavior of an entire system in relation to an extreme weather event. Next click, please. We're also developing a digital elicitation tool, which allows asset owning organizations to use a digital interface to start to develop those cascading asset risk models and understand what data is required from the organizational standpoint in order to get the insights out of CReDo for better decision making. Next click. Within CReDo, we also have a digital twinning element, which provides a knowledge graph and visualization of where the impacts are across the infrastructure system. And last click, please. Underpinning all of this is a secure data sharing infrastructure, which I'll tell you a little bit more about now. Next slide, please. So delivering the ability to share data securely to optimize decision-making across the connected infrastructure network is where digital twinning comes into the picture. CReDo uses a distributed architecture that allows asset owners to retain control of their data while securely sharing it within the CReDo platform. One click, please. This data sharing is not the same as open data. We've developed a data sharing license that allows CReDo controlled access to data about the asset. Subject to this license, CReDo uses a secure compute environment to combine a temporary copy of the data describing the asset with the data describing weather events and a contributed model to analyze the impact of the overall connected network. Next slide, next click, please. CReDo is then able to return insights to the data providers about their own assets. Subject to a suitable data sharing agreement that defines who can see what, it would also be possible to provide additional types of insights and services. For example, as we mentioned, decision support and automated reporting. One more click, please. A distributed architecture then segregates the information provided by each data provider and allows control over who can receive insights. The insights are calculated based on the overall connected network, and data is only aggregated in the secure compute environment and only for the duration of the calculations needed to generate the insights. Last click, please. The combination of the data sharing license, the provision of a secure compute environment by our colleagues at the UK's Science and Technologies Facilities Council, and the design of the digital twin is such that users can share data and retrieve insights without compromising the security of their data. And final click, please. And with that, the information is wiped from the system. Next slide. So within CReDo, we have ambitions to develop cross-sector models across a number of different infrastructure systems. Today, we're going to hear from our key partners in, as I said before, energy, water, and telecoms. But we're also looking to build a better understanding of how CReDo can support use cases across transport. And my colleague, Justine, will talk a bit more about our telecoms use case. Next slide. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to my colleague James Daniel from UK Power Networks to talk a little bit more about what we're doing in energy. Over to you, James.
Thanks, Alana. Hi, yeah, I'm James Daniel, Innovation Project Manager at UK Power Networks, which is a distribution network operator serving 8.5 million customers in London and the southeast of England. So if you go on to the next slide, please. So some of the key challenges that we at UK Power Networks face are here on the screen. Reliability in the face of climate change. As Alana introduced, extreme weather events such as storms, floods, and heat waves are increasing in frequency. We see it on the news all the time, and severity due to climate change. Investing in climate resilience helps us continue to deliver the consistent and reliable electricity and ensure that we keep the lights on, regardless of the challenging weather conditions. And then there's also protecting communities and critical infrastructure. As the DNO, UK Power Networks plays a real vital role in supporting hospitals and emergency services and many other essential critical infrastructure. So it's really crucial that we're safeguarding these critical services from disruption during extreme weather events that contributing to the well-being and safety of the communities that we serve. Then there's also reducing outage costs and having an efficient recovery. So having proactive investment in resilience reduces the cost of repairs and the service restorations that follow each severe event that occurs. And by implementing measures that prevent or minimize that damage, we can restore the service much more quickly and at a lower cost, which benefits everyone, benefits customers and the businesses and our business. And then there's future-proofing against increased demand. As we support the energy transition, which is very topical at the moment, the demand on all of our network will continue to grow. Things like EV chargers and all the renewable technologies that we hear about. So investing in climate resilience today ensures that we can handle both the current and the future demand without compromising reliability, even during those extreme conditions. Then there's enhancing sustainability and having our corporate responsibility. So climate resilience investments align with our sustainability goals by mitigating environmental impacts from unexpected failures such as transformer fires or fuel spills caused by flooding. And then there's our workforce and our people and our culture. I mean, this is so important to us as it is to many organizations, but investing in resilience isn't just about technology and infrastructure. It's also about preparing our teams to respond effectively. This empowers our workforce to handle the crisis with confidence, ensuring a culture of adaptability that can evolve as the climate challenges grow. Next slide, please. So we're super proud actually to have been championing CReDo since the outset with support from all the way up to our executive management team, including the Director of Asset Management, our CIO, and even our CEO. It's recognized as a really great opportunity and an innovation breakthrough. And to date, some of our involvement over the projects that Alana talked about earlier actually is that we've been giving and looking at access to our asset data and our fault data. We've been developing the asset models, exploring different extreme weather scenarios and different analysis, expert elicitation interviews and workshops with our experts who manage and operate all of the assets. And we've been co-designing some of the prototype interfaces so that we get the right look and feel and get the tools that actually work for our needs. And then we've been working on the data sharing agreement. So it's not all just about the tech, but actually a lot of complexity around policy and legal setup is really important as well. Next slide, please. So we're now really, as Alana said, we're now from an Ofgem SIF beta project perspective, just in mobilization stage. This is a project that's spanning over 3.5 years. And the key hurdles that we see are literally the sheer scale of this solution is actually immense, involving network and asset operators from obviously the energy sector that we've spoken about, but also wider than that as well. And the challenge of keeping the assets, the people, the data secure, but also usable, having a usable solution is a really tricky dichotomy and a fine dance that we have to play to make sure that we can address that, make it usable, but also highly secure, particularly in a solution like this. And lastly, there's the complexity in coordinating so many stakeholders across so many organizations and at varying levels. So move on to the next slide, please. But this project also has significant opportunities with all of those challenges in mind to collaborate across organizational and sector boundaries, which is how the real value of CReDo will be unlocked. And this map just tries to, this set of maps tries to give you a view of the kind of the landscape and complexity that we're trying to approach here. But we've structured the project in a way to try the best way to make this a successful project. We've set it up as a phased approach where we'll develop functionality with one geography first, before scaling out to another area in phase 2, and then to other sectors in phase 3, all while extending the functionality of the digital twin as we go. Furthermore, we're really laser focused on the cross-sector regulatory requirements and approaching regulatory change with a dedicated team to identify the gaps and the opportunities with support from Ofgem. And then lastly, we're running a resilience working group to coordinate the bilateral communications with all the network operators and inviting external parties to participate in the evolution of the CReDo platform as we progress over the course of the project. So we're actually on this point, it's really important that we welcome expressions of interest via email. So do let us know if you are interested in participating in the Resilience Working Group and finding out more. I think we can share the email address with you after, I think it was on these slides. And we'll be sure to keep you updated once the Resilience Working Group kicks off. But for me, I think that it's a really incredible, challenging project, but it has the right collection and expertise across the right mix of delivery partners to make this a success. And I'm really excited to be part of it. Next slide, please. So I think that's it from me. I'm going to hand over to Richard, I think. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi. Thanks, James. Hello, everybody. My name is Richard Buckingham. I'm the Climate Change and Carbon Manager at Anglian Water. I've been involved in this project for quite some while from the very first stages, really. If you could move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so what do we see as the key challenges? Well, the first thing is, I guess, rather obvious. Failure in the water sector drives customer dissatisfaction and could impact on the functioning of key assets. Water is required by everybody, and furthermore, a loss of water, even for a very short period, can be very difficult to cope with, particularly if you think about hospitals and other critical services. So it really is fundamental that we keep the water on. I think the next thing we need to talk about is climate change adaptation costs. I've said here it could be high. I think it's we could rephrase that, it will be high, which of course places increased financial burden on the companies and customers and society to meet these needs. The climate is changing. It has changed. It will change further. And we need to make sure we can adapt in the most efficient, effective way. And the third challenge is around sharing data across organizations. Everybody has lots of data. It's in different formats. It's got different protocols, and sharing this data and the CReDo platform synthesizing this data such that it can all be used effectively is a key challenge. Alana has also talked about data security, and clearly that's on everybody's mind. It's taken a long time to develop the various security protocols that are in place with CReDo, and I think the partners are very happy with those. It's taken a very long time, so it just illustrates the complexity of data sharing. If you can move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so very wordy slide, I'm afraid. So how have we collaborated? So I think the first thing to say, CReDo is a mechanism to understand how different elements of the infrastructure network are connected to one another and interdependent with one another. And we can understand how these assets fail in the context of various climate variables, to understand which will fail, and then we can visualize those assets to understand how this affects in the network. Now, if you think back to one of the slides that Alana showed before about a flood where two assets failed that were flooded, and that then cascaded down to everything else flooding. It might not quite work like that. You might end up with a single asset flooding and then a number of different assets in the network fail, not all of them. So understanding how things fit together and how things are connected is crucial to understanding potential asset failure, and indeed thinking about how you might deliver climate resilience to those specific assets that are the most important within that connected network, which from a water sector point of view may indeed not be a water site. It could be, but it might not be. And that's one of the powers of CReDo. We can understand where the key dependencies and weak points in the overall system may be. So in the first phase of our Ofwat funding, we developed the CReDo Asset Risk Tool. So this was understanding around extreme heat. You may remember the very hot summer we had in 2022. In the Anglian Water region, the temperature got over 40 degrees. And it's the first time, I think, since records began that it's been over 40 degrees in the UK. And I think that is perhaps a taste of things to come. I don't think it will be the one and only time temperatures went over 40 degrees. So this tool brings together an understanding of if and how assets may fail at particular temperatures, and then overlays climate temperature information over time to understand how likely a particular temperature and duration is likely to occur, and how often, and how that will affect particular asset types. So we can start understanding the vulnerabilities with regard to extreme heat of particular asset types and start planning accordingly. CReDo also gives us the opportunity to think about developing overall infrastructure network resilience strategies. So at the moment, we as a water company will develop our own asset resilience approach, as will the electricity distribution companies and the gas distribution companies and the telecom sector. Everybody will develop their own. Now, if we do that in a coordinated way, because of the approach that CReDo can give us of understanding all our interdependencies, then perhaps we can first of all develop a more comprehensive and resilient approach, but potentially that could also deliver that better solution at a lower cost. And I think the next bit is around data sharing. So as Alana's mentioned, we can share data securely and understand the impacts of scenarios. And overcoming these barriers of data security and confidentiality is key to the success of CReDo. Those participating need to be assured that any data they provide is secure. Particularly, we're talking about pieces of infrastructure here that, first of all, can't fail and also are part of the UK's critical national infrastructure. If we could move on to the next slide, please. Okay, in terms of barriers, I've talked about data sharing and understanding that we can share data in a secure environment is key to the success of CReDo. It's also a key barrier. As I mentioned, it took many months to agree the initial data sharing agreement, and organisations often have other pressures, and their legal teams cannot necessarily dedicate a whole host of time to solving this issue. So we have templates in place, but that is a key barrier to the progress of CReDo. The next bit is around asset failure modelling, and I mentioned we've done our extreme heat tool. But many of the extreme heat scenarios that we're talking about are scenarios that we have never before experienced. So we have no lived experience of a 5-day period over 40 degrees because it's never happened in the UK before. So when we're trying to understand asset failure modelling, we can't do it from historical data. We have to do it from our general understanding. So there are inherent uncertainties around that, but nonetheless, we know these situations are coming, and that's the approach that we have to take. In terms of opportunities for growth, we, as Alana mentioned, have been successful in our stage 1 application for Ofwat Innovation Transform funding, and we'll be submitting our bid on stage 2 by mid-January. We're keen in this bid to start thinking about underground assets, and with a particular focus on soil moisture deficit. So first thing to say is most of the linear assets in the water sector are underground. So therefore, storm effects that you might see that are affecting the large-scale electricity transmission networks are less relevant to the water sector because much of our infrastructure is underground. But you may have heard of freeze thaw. So historically, we would get a pipe burst in the winter where you had very cold temperatures overnight and then a very quick thaw during the daytime. The ground would move, it would move quite quickly, and there would be pipe bursts as a consequence. Now, as climate change has progressed, the frequency of freeze-thaw bursts in the water sector has decreased because we're having less cold weather. However, what we're starting to see is more bursts in the summertime. So when soil is subjected to prolonged drought, it dries out and it moves. And that movement can cause pipe bursts in the same way that freeze-thaw can. The part that's a little bit more relevant, though, is that these bursts happen in the summertime when, first of all, demand for water is higher, and second of all, the supply of that water is lower. And it's also worth noting that our forecast modelling suggests that the total number of bursts as a consequence of soil moisture deficit in the summer into the future will be very much higher than they ever were with regard to freeze-thaw. So it's a key issue for not just the water sector, but any organisations that have underground pipework and other assets, because this could also affect foundations and other elements of civil infrastructure as a consequence. The next bit is around the collaboration with Stream. So Stream is a water sector open data platform where the water companies collaborate in order to release similar data across every water company in an open way so that everyone can see it. Now, CReDo is a bit different because we're not necessarily talking about open data. We're talking about data that can be supplied by all water companies in the same way into the CReDo platform, such that we can get the similar inputs and outputs. And that is a discussion that's underway. I think the other thing to say would be around the involvement of other infrastructure networks and other utilities within the existing networks. The more data we have, the better the outputs we can achieve. The final thing to say is the support we've had from both Ofgem and Ofwat and engaging with other regulators and policymakers to achieve greater scale. I think we do have an opportunity to engage with the Regulatory Innovation Office, which has just been founded by the government. If we can bring more decision makers to the table, then the greater the opportunity for progress. So that's me. I'm now going to hand over to Justine Webster from BT.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Justine Webster. I work in BT Group, and I am the Service Risk Manager specialising in the impact of weather and climate on our networks. So next slide, please, and we'll make a start. There are three main elements involved in telecoms. There's the fixed, the mobile, and the access networks. Fixed network is just your home telephone type scenario. The mobile network speaks for itself, and the access network is the external network that you see, street cabinets, our open reach network. I'm going to concentrate because I'm thinking about the use case that we want to develop with CReDo. And so I'm going to concentrate today mainly on the mobile network, but there are elements of the other networks involved in this. So just to give you an idea, there are roughly 100,000 mobile cell sites in the UK across 4 mobile network operators. The power resilience varies for the cell sites, but 2 of the most widely relied on resilience methods are backup power supplies, typically batteries, and the ability to do signal overlap from other masts, including also a national roaming where 999 calls can be made using any network. It doesn't matter what network you're on if you need to dial 999. So the first challenge that we have in BT is that we're a national company. We don't have regional boundaries. The number of CNI operators across the UK can really lead to delays in coordination during severe events between the joint Cat2 responders, Category 2 responders, and our, for example, distribution network operators. In addition, DNOs have legislative licence obligations stating that all customers must be treated equally. And it should be stated that BT doesn't expect priority restoration in response to unplanned power outages, but power and telecoms are independent sectors, and they've both got separate lead government departments, separate regulators, and separate legislative obligations, which can create challenges. And that siloed approach can also lead to potential resilience compromises as well. So if you look at the map on the right-hand side, I'm not sure if you saw the transition, but the weather warnings that you saw on the first map before it transitioned into the map that you see now, this is the result of those weather warnings. These are power outages that we typically see through the network. That gives you an indication of the number of regions and DNOs and utilities that we have to then liaise with to try and understand the situation and the difficulties to actually put our resilience methods into play. The second challenge that we've got is competition laws for mobile masts. We really need a joint approach during severe weather events for mobile operators to provide that joined up resilience approach similar to a shared rural network. And challenge 3, and it's been mentioned twice already, is infrastructure data security. Providing key CNI asset data, such as location and dependencies, into one database is a high national security risk. As well as being a security risk, the data is commercially sensitive. So, for example, location of infrastructure and coverage information is something that people may not want to share. So that really becomes sort of the 3 challenges that we need to, the 3 main challenges that we need to overcome. Next slide, please. Okay, so we believe that collaboration with CReDo and development of their use case will help to address those challenges. So the first challenge regarding us being UK-wide and the regional coverage, development of a single source power and other CNA outages map for the UK, which can provide key information on impacts and duration of events, would allow us to plan our resilience, such as working collaboratively with other CNI operators, and things, just simple things like directing total site generators where they'll benefit the most, and sharing that responsibility amongst other CNI operators to make sure that we're not all vying for the same resilience method. Challenge 2, so the competition laws and the lack of a joined up resilience approach. Understanding the mobile operator impact collectively, for example, can indicate where we would focus our efforts to restore service and where we may need to prioritise things like rapid response vehicles in the event of multiple operator failure to make sure that we've got that basic SLA and customers and society can still dial 999 in an emergency. And the final challenge, the data, the safe space to understand our interdependencies, that really has been covered, and I think Alana covered it quite well. But to have that facility within CReDo without compromising national security. So in summary, a collaboration with CReDo had helped to prioritise the restoration of critical telecoms infrastructure under extenuating circumstances. It'll enable access to calls, including emergency service access to 999 and government emergency alerts during unplanned power outages, and restoring the power and the telecoms to a hard-hit area would in turn allow, benefit not just this power sector, but all other sectors that rely on telemetry, monitoring, alarm notifications, communications with engineers, communications with customers, communications with vulnerable people. All of that could still continue during severe events. Next slide, please. So the barriers that we feel we have at the moment, the first one is a reluctance to share asset data, a mistrust of that the data is kept safe and secure and doesn't compromise anything. And that is a real barrier, a real challenge that, that we need to really overcome. The cross-regulatory and legislative adoption, a joined-up approach from the top with lead government departments and regulatory bodies with one clear purpose, a joined-up purpose is needed. It currently feels fragmented and siloed, with each area unable to reach any decisions on viable solutions or changes to legislation. CReDo doesn't have to do that, and it allows us to still continue to do what we need to do within our own sectors without compromising anything. Asset owner adoption, so we need more asset owners to make CReDo work effectively. And the main one is really for us at the moment, funding for the multi-beneficial use case. No funding means limited telecoms development, and that doesn't just hurt BT. It's got implications across all telecoms, including the 4 mobile network operators, and wider into other sectors who rely on communications. The opportunities that we feel CReDo gives, scaling up, so adoption by other asset owners, lead government bodies, regulators to buy into a single solution that can result in non-competitive partnerships and two-way benefits from joint working between the sectors in the planning, response and recovery. In-life modelling, so resilience management through in-life models, forward forecasting and nowcasting during significant events. And expansion to other non-climate related events. So you've already seen Richard speak around heat, but there is also things like we could expand into things like chemical spillage, wildfires, other emergency incidents such as, unfortunately, hopefully we don't get any, but terrorism, anything like that, where we understand the CNI impacts and the required effective and efficient responses and dependencies that we have on each other. And that's all from me. So I'll hand you back to Alana.
Thanks, Justine, and thank you to all our speakers. I'll now invite everyone to join me on screen for the Q&A portion. And I have a question which I'd be really interested to understand perspectives from each of your sectors. So we've talked about building resilience both within and across our sectors. So in terms of progress, have we as a UK progressed on developing resilience since, for example, Storm Arwen, which was 3 years ago? And in your view, how could CReDo help the collective effort to protect our critical national infrastructure in that extreme circumstance?
Do you want me to take that first, Alana?
Absolutely.
Okay, so yes, there has been development. There has been a significant amount of work in the telecoms and power networks, particularly. However, I still feel that if we were to have an event like Arwen happen this weekend, very nervous about this weekend, I don't think that we will have made enough changes or learned enough and moved quickly enough. CReDo, if we had a tool that was able to forecast and show us the impacts, the with the weather that's coming in and the potential impacts and those dependencies and interdependencies, we would have the facility to work more closely and collaboratively, share those and pool those resources to make sure that the most vulnerable areas would be protected, mitigated. But at the moment, I don't think we've done enough.
Yeah, I'm happy to pick up on that. I think because it's similar to ourselves, really. I think we've done an awful lot in probably key areas like how we respond to extreme weather scenarios, and our response is something that we're really proud of. How we rally the whole organisation to get on the calls and support communities and people that are without power, and making sure that we get them back online as quickly as possible. But there really feels like there is a gap in terms of how we communicate and engage and work with each other across sectors, for one thing, but also being able to very quickly see. I mean, CReDo's hopefully going to be the nirvana of actually helping us see really quickly where those risks are across sector and help us invest in the right way, not just doing siloed investments in each of our own areas.
Yes, I commit. So I suppose it on the face of it, you would think that if there's a big storm, overground high level assets are going to be the most in danger. So on the face of it, you think, well, the water sector therefore is not going to be hugely affected. But if we could use CReDo to understand what might happen, particularly to the transmission network, ahead of time, we can start moving water around and diverting wastewater and so on to those assets that are still going to be connected to the power network. So it gives us a much better understanding of what is likely to happen, and therefore we can respond, move water around, move wastewater around, and still maintain the service to customers.
Thanks, Richard. Another question, which I'm interested in understanding kind of the difference between messaging perhaps within your sectors, but then what the message would be across all sectors. So in terms of building trust and adoption of technologies like CReDo, what do you think the hook is from an organizational perspective? How can we achieve buy-in for that cross-sector vision of building resilience?
Should I go? I think
Absolutely.
I think it's about it's safe to share your data would be number one. Number two, it will protect the resilience of your organization and allow you to maintain the service to your customers or restore the service to your customers as soon as you can. And thirdly, it might or it will likely save you money in the long term because you can develop coherent resilient strategies in the context of how your assets are related to everybody else's.
Yeah, my mind goes to like the news of the recent news internationally, and how dramatic some of those events have occurred, and how they could have been prevented. So thinking of Spain, for example, and how those events could have been prevented with coordinated efforts and collaboration and upfront strategic planning. And although, and I think we need to get behind ourselves, get behind CReDo, and the more people that are involved, the more network partners, the more industries that have critical infrastructure that are involved in it, the more intelligent the platform will be for everybody to be able to make those insightful decisions. So I think, yeah, it's a matter of everyone, the more people get involved, the better it will be.
Okay, and so in terms of building the trust and adoption, Alana, I think the main thing for me and what I hear on a regular basis is data security. And I know we've touched on it and everybody's mentioned it, but there's still just a deep mistrust of data sharing. And I think if CReDo can be demonstrated to be a very secure but simple way to do this without multiple protracted and complicated NDAs and things that have to go on, if it can actually be done in a simple and very secure way, I think that will go a long way to making people more trustful about what CReDo is trying to achieve.
Thank you all. I have a question now for James. Can you tell us a little bit, James, about how the gas networks are involved or will be involved in the beta project?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on one of the slides there, I had a set of maps of the different sectors that are involved. So in the CReDo Beta project, we have distribution energy, we have distribution gas and transmission gas. So National Gas and Cadent are both involved in the project as well. So they're helping with providing access to relevant data, they're helping us with the design of the interfaces and access to experts for doing the elicitation to help us create the risk models.
Thanks, James. I have a question for Richard. So, how is the tool with water sector being used for increased demand? With example, a recent EA assessment of water demand in the Humber for hydrogen production would see a 120% increase on the South Bank and a 6% increase on the North Bank. But it doesn't take into account the increased house building or agricultural summer demand. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. So the way that CReDo works at the moment, it's around asset failure as a consequence of climate events. As I think, as Justine said, there's no reason why it couldn't be down to other events. I don't know, a vehicle strike, other kind of episodes where asset fails. So it isn't really around demand management in the context of water or demand provision. But if we fast forward 10 or 15 years, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had a integrated digital twin which understood energy demand and energy supply and water demand and water supply and where the water is and where the electricity is being generated. And we had this wonderful picture of how we can shift energy and shift water around in order to meet the demands in the various places and therefore be much more efficient about things. Now, that isn't something that CReDo could currently do. But it is something, given the architecture that has been set up and the data sharing and the arrangements that are made, it could, with a fair wind and some money, move into that kind of space in due course. But that's me wildly speculating, I'm afraid.
It's good to be ambitious. Thank you, panelists. I have one more question, which I'll invite your answers as a closing thought. And it's one of my personal favorite questions to ask. So we're having a reunion of this webinar 10 years from now. So in your wildest dreams, what has CReDo's impact been on your organization or sector? And what do you think we've achieved collectively across national infrastructure?
I'll take that one first. So don't get me wrong, there's been a lot of good work done since, for example, Storm Arwen independently and within each of the different sectors. But I would hope that 10 years from now, when we come together, that we've got a real collaborative working to prevent and minimize disruption, to prioritize resilience and restoration across multiple sectors, to benefit society, the economy, and the CNIs through improved incident response.
Thank you, Justine. Richard?
I'll keep it quite short. I think I would hope that as a consequence of CReDo, we can cope with the extreme weather that we will be experiencing in 10 years and will be experiencing in 10 or 20 years' time further on. So CReDo has allowed us to deliver resilience in our infrastructure networks.
Thanks, Richard. And James?
I mean, they've just covered it really, but I think yeah, Nirvana state in 10 years' time, technology and advancement of technology is rapidly growing. So I can't actually imagine what CReDo actually will look like in 10 years' time. But I hope that the Nirvana state is that we're all in a really great place to be able to prevent outages, serious outages across all national critical infrastructure when severe weather events occur, which is the aim of it really. I imagine actually that we'll advance much further than that, and actually the platform will offer many more opportunities to us that we can't even imagine at the moment, because I think that's the benefit. Bringing that amount of data and critical data together will offer huge opportunities.
Wonderful. Thank you, James. Thank you, Richard and Justine, for joining us today. I also want to thank our other project partners. So, Kat, if I can ask you to put up the last slide, we would be remiss to not mention what a collective effort developing CReDo has been to date and will continue to be. We can't build scale without a community to do so. So there we go. There it comes. Just want to thank all the organizations, too many to name off right now, but it really is a collaborative effort, and it's one of the things that make the CReDo vision so exciting. Thank you again, speakers, and to our participants. I hope you've enjoyed the session. We will be sharing a recording. I'm aware that some of you were not able to access the webinar until a bit far in the presentation, so you will have access to the full recording. Lastly, we are always interested in collaboration and bringing people on the journey with us to developing and delivering CReDo. As James mentioned, we'll be relaunching our resilience working group in the coming months. So you can express your interest at our email, which is credo@cp.catapult.org.uk. It's a very long email address, but you will get one of us. And we look forward to next time where we can give you another update about our progress. Thank you all. Have a lovely afternoon.